Okay, we're back, we're live, we're here in the core of downtown, here at Pioneer Plaza. And guess who joins us today? Very exciting. And I don't know why, but I keep thinking of the homeless, and David Copperfield, and Charles Dickens. I mean,
oh yeah,
it's about urchins. Not street urchins, but ocean urchins. Those are not homeless. They have a home. It's the anyway.
the happier urchin.
The happier. Caitlyn Genovese and Aki Laruson.
Very nice.
Yeah? Okay, close enough.
Yeah.
Okay, and they are both biology students. They're both graduate students. They're both at Manoa, and they're both doing research about urchins in two separate departments. So tell me, you got to make a voluntary decision to get involved. You made a decision you wanted to be involved with urchins. Ah, okay. How did your life point you to urchins?
So it was a winding course. But yeah, I came here, I did my undergraduate in California, and I started working as an undergrad on projects with little marine critters that were close to the shore. And when I came out here, I started working in a lab that had a collection of urchin tissues in the freezer, because there's a very interesting story with the total dispersal of these urchins. They're found all over the Pacific, from California to Hawaii, all the way to South Africa. But there's not very much known about how connected these populations are. And there's a big mystery about how these populations maintain each other. And so I've kind of got involved in looking at the genetics of that connectivity.
What is it? About that big?
Oh, no. The larvae might be like that big, but the urchins can get up to, hefty sizes.
Spiny.
Yeah, the particularly tasty ones get very large.
You don't want to put your hands on the spinies, though.
No, that's true. You do kind of want to.
Why? What happens if you put,
Well, oftentimes
they're not intentionally stinging you, though.
No. These guys are very passive.
Yeah.
They've got their defense, and they kind of need it because a lot of things eat them. They're eaten by octopuses and fish.
You didn't choose the urchins because they're aggressive, because they're not aggressive.
That's right.
You chose them because they're passive.
Yeah.
You chose them because they're sweet.
Yes.
I wonder why, Charles Dickens, I don't know if he actually called the street urchins, but they have been called street urchins for hundreds of years.
It's true.
Why is a street urchin child, an urchin? What is...
It's actually because the original use of the term meant something kind of otherworldly, so like fairies and goblins, like there's an old Gaelic root of the word, and then it became kind of anything weird or kind of uncomfortable was called an urchin. And eventually hedgehogs got the term urchin because they were these weird little spiny things that walk around that people didn't like very much. And so when we needed a term for these spiny little things in the ocean, they're sea urchins. So sea little weird things.
Sea little, but sometimes it's a pinchable person, right? You pinch him like that, and he's an urchin.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's good or bad. I don't know if I want to be after this discussion.
Maybe some kind of troublemaker, little fairy folk.
Yeah, right. It's sort of without a home, lollygagging around, nothing productive,
Yes.
Are they productive? Are they productive, these urchins?
These guys actually can be pretty productive.
Well, let's shift to you, Caitlyn. Caitlyn Genovese, how did you get here?
Oh, sometimes I question that myself, but I started doing research during my undergrad in Boston on marine invertebrates. I was looking at sea anemones, and when I was looking sea anemones,
sea anemones.
so like
spell that for the people.
Anemones.
Sea anemones.
Anemones. It's like a spelling bee.
Are they like urchins?
Not really at all. They're invertebrates, so they're part of the cnidarians, so same as corals. But
that got you into it, though.
Yeah, it got me into the invertebrate
little animals in the ocean.
And I was working with the adults, and then when I was looking at grad schools, I was looking at different labs, and my advisor now, Dr. Amy Moran, was working on urchin. Amy Moran. She works on larval biology and ecology. And the question I was asking, I do kind of a physiology background to a lot of the research I do, and the reason I decided to use urchins initially was kind of because they're easy to exploit in a way that you can collect gametes to study their larvae really easily. I know it does. It makes me sound. It makes me sound really evil.
Aki wouldn't do that.
Oh, wow.
No. But then as I started working with them, I mean, they and their larvae are very charismatic, and I think they're very underestimated in that.
You got to write this
I
down.
know.
Charismatic we got now.
I know, right? Well, I've done a couple outreach things with some of the high schools around here too, and they're all like urchins, like they never want to go near them. They're spiky. They think that they hurt, and then when they actually get to hold them or look at their larvae, they're like, oh, they're actually pretty cool. They're cute. So I think it's something that people see and are exposed to all the time, but they don't interact with them very often. And I think when they do, they realize that they're pretty fun.
That. You guys go out to
so.
the high schools and talk to kids about urchins?
Do elementary school tide walks occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
Tide walks?
Yeah,
What's
tide
a
walk.
tide walk? Take us on a tide walk.
Oh, tide
What do
walk.
you do to go
It's
on a
hard
tide
to do
walk?
inside,
Yeah.
But man, a tide walk, that's the whole thing that encouraged me to go into biology, really. You
Ah.
walk around where the ocean is coming ashore, and especially on an island like Hawaii where you have a lot of volcanic rock that you can see very clearly, forms really cool little patterns, little tiny bays almost where the water's coming in. And you have so many different creatures living there. A lot of invertebrates, so little animals that don't have spines. You have crabs crawling around, you have even sometimes little fish, but the invertebrates are the main interest. And you have urchins, sea stars, sea cucumbers. You have all kinds of cool things that are just right there next to the ocean front. And if you walk out, just get your toes wet, you can see an incredible ecosystem. There's all small bits of algae that come in. Sometimes the waves get really strong. Sometimes it's very quiet. It's a wonderful way to get exposed to the diversity.
Great entry point. Sea walk. Sea walk.
Yeah, tide walk.
Tide walk. We'll be right back. This is Jay Fidell. We're here on Research in Manoa with Caitlyn and Aki, and we'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Donna Blanchard. I'm the host of Center Stage here on the ThinkTech digital series. The show is every Wednesday from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock, and I want you to watch this show because I think that when we talk with artists on the show about what they do, how they do it, and most importantly, why they do it, I believe that it resonates within each of us and we find something inside of ourselves that brings us closer to all of humanity. That's what arts are there to do, and that's what I'm here to do on this show. That's Center Stage. It's on every Wednesday from 2 to 3 o'clock. I hope to see you there.
It's coming. Okay, we're back. We're live. We're exploring urchins from all sides, and that's appropriate because they look the same from all sides, don't they? It's like a little ball, a little softball that came apart.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Pretty accurate.
Symmetry. Yeah.
Yeah.
The symmetry of urchins is one of the many things that's so incredibly fascinating. Because, unlike us, we have a face, we have a back. Urchins, they have 5-fold symmetry. Like you could divide them into 5 equal portions that mirror each other.
Would each portion reproduce a whole urchin?
Oh, they can regenerate amazing things.
Oh, I didn't know that. Did you know that? You didn't know that.
It's really,
fabulous.
it's especially when you look at sea stars, you can see it really clearly. Because if they lose an arm, they can just regrow that thing. They have no problem with that. And if you
Why?
imagine
What's that called? Regeneration? Regenerative something?
Yeah, regenerative potential. That sounds sciencey. Regenerative potential. Yes. They're able to bounce back from really incredible cuts and damages.
Yeah.
So you guys are both, what, master's candidates?
PhD.
PhD.
Sorry.
We don't have it yet. We're technically
we're
hoity-toity.
in the process. So.
Well, how many years to go?
Hopefully a couple more for me.
Yeah, if you're lucky.
Well, we'll see. I'm aiming for a year. Hopefully
Okay.
my advisor's not laughing right now, but hoping for about a year.
Okay, and so I guess it's appropriate for me to ask you the subject of your dissertations, eh? So go for it. Somebody is watching. They're going to want a clear statement of what you're doing.
I'm looking at urchins and other invertebrates, looking at their larvae and looking at the physiology and biology of how they grow and metamorphose in the plankton. So a big thing about most invertebrates like urchins is they kind of have 2 different lives. So they have a life where they start off as a larvae and they grow and develop in the plankton, and then they have to metamorphose into a small adult, and then they grow up as an adult and they live their adult life. So I'm focusing more on the early life stages, and I'm looking at growth energetics, so how much energy it takes them to grow and to reach metamorphosis in the plankton. And I want to look at how environmental stressors, such as increases in temperature or ocean acidification, can affect the amount of energy it's going to take for them to reach adulthood, because there's a chance they might not, and that could have some devastating effects on adult populations, because you can't get the adult urchins without the larval urchins surviving. So.
Sure. Yeah. Where are they? I mean, I know they're in the tide, because
Yeah,
Aki
so
already told me that. But where are they, around all our islands, for example?
Yeah. Well, so a lot of where the larvae end up depends on ocean currents. So for a lot of their lives, are kind of at the mercy of the currents in the ocean, and so it depends on where they start developing. So where their adult population was, where they were released. It depends on the tides, and also there is some larval behaviors. They can move up and down in the ocean column, and they swim very slowly and not with a lot of power, but they do have the ability to swim. So
How do they swim? The little fingers out there, those hundreds
well,
of
they
them?
do have arms that come out, but the arms are mostly for food capture. But surrounding the arms are cilia, which are tiny, tiny hairs.
The cilia
and they
move.
Yeah, much like a paramecium or something like that, where they have the tiny cilia that surrounds their body, and they can use that to swim.
But they don't have a lot of control over where they go, though.
Not the strongest swimmers.
Yeah,
maybe.
they're not. Yeah, they're kind of at the mercy of the currents for a lot of their life. So.
You sympathize with them, don't you?
I do.
And that's why you like the cakey ones. They're the ones who you can
Yeah.
most easily sympathize with.
It's true. Yeah, you want to help them make it.
So, but there's got to be an experiment in here somewhere. What is it?
So I'm actually looking at the amount of food availability, and so the urchin. So there are some larvae that don't need to feed at all. Their mom gives them enough energy in the egg that they can go through the plankton without having to feed. And the ones that I look at, they do have to feed. They have to eat algae while they're in the plankton. So food availability is a big component of whether they make it to adulthood or not. But it also comes at a cost, because growth. You need food to grow, but it also comes at an energetic cost. So what I do is I look at the oxygen consumption rates, which I use to say this is the amount of energy they're using to feed and to grow in the plankton. And I'm looking at that and how it differs between ones that are fed and ones that aren't fed. So they're not going to use as much energy when they're not fed, but they're not going to have enough energy to grow.
So you do this on the campus or in the ocean?
I do most of my animal work at Koala Marine Lab. Which is
you mean
kind
that
of at the
old
bottom
building
of
they're going
Wood.
to take down, that building?
Yeah.
Miraculous, wonderful old building.
It is. It's a great place to
Hopefully
work.
it's going to stay around.
Yeah.
I never knew anybody who worked in there before.
Oh, really?
Congratulations.
Yeah, there's a bunch of people there.
No, I don't have a setup there. I'm mostly doing genetics work,
Oh.
but there's a lot of work that's come out of there that I have to reference when I'm talking about the population.
Are you envious of Caitlyn?
Well, I am envious how much time she actually gets to play with things in the bay and going out there. I'm oftentimes a little bit more stuck pipetting small amounts of things into different tubes.
So let me just go a couple of questions further. Okay, so what are you trying to show something in particular? What is the great truth that you're after on this,
So
whether it's true or not?
Right. So in the long run, I want to show that at increased temperatures, they're going to have to use more energy. And so in the context of global climate change, populations might be more at risk, especially in the early life stages. They could be really vulnerable to changes in temperature, because the amount of energy that they need to metamorphose into adults will increase, but the amount of food that is available for them to use to reach this point won't increase.
Well, that's really interesting.
So it might have, a devastating effect on the populations, the adult populations. So.
Do you have confirmation of that yet? I mean,
Not yet.
Because it strikes me that logically, you could also find that greater temperatures in the ocean could make it easier for them to metamorphosize.
There's different theories out there. So it's kind of like larvae are so small and very little is known about what is happening to them while they're actually in the water column. So without being there with the larvae and seeing what's going on, you can't really say what's better for a larvae. So a big question is whether it's best to develop quickly and get out of the plankton really fast, or whether it's better to be larger when you metamorphose, because the larger you are, the less of a target you are for predators, and the better chance you have of surviving.
You ever factor in garbage and bad chemicals coming down?
Oh yeah, there's lots of research on that.
Yeah, I'm sure they find it, or it finds them.
Yeah, I'm sure they're floating around in it.
Yeah, that's a big stressor, I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot of environmental stressors, and I've kind of isolated out temperature and kind of stressors that might be involved with global climate change, but there's tons of others.
Do you guys talk to each other?
We
Genetics thing?
No, we never
The
speak to
genetics
each
thing that
No, actually,
Aki's doing, is it interesting?
So
Oh,
she-
yeah, for sure.
And I remember one time you let me know, I was like, oh, we found a hermaphroditic Trinusis urchin, and
Yeah.
there's things that you can, when you're not in the field oftentimes, that you can spot. That's
Yeah, and
pretty cool information.
places to collect and stuff, we're always discussing, oh, I found them here. You can go here and find them and use them for your research, or, yeah.
The more the better. So what about genetics now? This is important. So it's about yay big when it's mature.
Actually, it can depend a lot on how much food it's had.
Maybe those stressors too.
Yeah. So if an urchin doesn't get a lot of food,
Yeah.
they can actually shrink. They can reabsorb some of their, what we call a test. It's like their skeleton.
Yeah.
And oftentimes you'll see it in gardening stores. You'll have an urchin test that's been, lacquered and looks all pretty. But those things can actually get reabsorbed by the animal to make it a little bit smaller or a little bit larger, depending on how much food it's getting.
Mammals do that too, don't they?
Yeah, well, we have a hard time changing our bone structure too much once we've grown them.
But they can.
They can. Yeah, we can change other things.
Gee, it sounds like you could learn a lot from urchins. I mean, that would be useful for human development.
Well, the particularly cool thing, especially about working with larvae and fertilization, and the reason they've become such a big model organism, a lot of people have looked at urchin fertilization and how they get their little larvae, because they are actually pretty easy to look at and to get all the eggs and sperm from them. Honestly, if you pick up an urchin and shake it around a lot, it's going to release a lot of things
Is
into the
that
water.
all you have to do? That's pretty easy.
It's pretty easy, right? But most of the time, we don't want people to go around shaking them because they,
Do
we
not
do want
shake.
them. We do want them
Do not
to
shake.
do it naturally. If there's a
Shaken,
big
but not
swell, a lot of
stirred.
wave activity, they might start shooting things out into the column and hope there's going to be fertilization up there.
So can we get to the non-family part of the show and talk about the? It's a family show, but once in a while, science calls. So what is the sex life of an urchin?
Yeah, sex life of an urchin is
Try
a
to be
very.
discreet about this.
It's a very simple and elegant affair. Essentially, you have.
Operative is the word affair.
Excuse me. Yes. So the male urchin and the female urchin really don't interact that much. It's mostly like, oh, conditions seem to be pretty favorable. I assume, sort of, for most of the other urchins of whatever sex, they're going to be thinking it's pretty favorable as well. So I'm going to shoot things up into the water, and if everybody thinks like I do, and they should because they're also an urchin, there's going to be some fertilization that's going to happen.
Sperm and the egg both go in the water.
Yeah.
And somehow they find each other. They must be in high concentration then, eh?
Yeah, and they have to release a lot of them, and they have to do it pretty regularly. And so they're very dependent on a lot of factors in the ocean because they don't do little urchin dances. They don't have very big, fancy urchin displays.
Attract the other sex.
Right. It's just like I think conditions are favorable. We should see what happens.
And that would be wave conditions and turbulence and what have you.
Temperature.
Temperature,
Yeah.
Temperature.
the diadema, I know, in the Pacific and Caribbean, sometimes it's on a lunar cycle that they release their eggs and sperm.
How do they know?
It's amazing. They have remarkably simple and yet remarkably complex ways of interacting with the world. A lot of the little tube feet, obviously the spines are what you see mostly, but they'll also have little tube feet, and those little things have like a little cluster of nerves at the end of them, and sometimes they might even be involved in detecting light or detecting different chemicals in the water, and they're very good at getting a large population going right when conditions are favorable. And when that happens, they're actually very good at keeping coral reefs clear of algae that's growing across it. So these guys are very good herbivores and grazers.
So this is really important now to the coral reefs, and they in turn are important to a lot of things.
And with those populations, so sort of what I'm working on with the genetic aspect is seeing what makes a robust population. Because if a population is very, very inbred, not a lot of diversity, it might not stay around for a very long time. A single disease outbreak or a single stressor might wipe out a massive population. But if there's a lot of diversity, they're more likely to be robust and to stick around.
So how can there be diversity? I mean, do they move around a lot?
Well, the adults.
Do you have members of one colony joining another colony? And
that's an excellent question, and that's one that I'm really trying to answer. Because these guys, the adults don't move very far. If you do a tide walk, and I really encourage everybody to do a tide walk at one point or another.
With shoes.
It's a wonderful thing.
With shoes.
With shoes.
Yeah.
Yes. You can see, if you can see an urchin it's not exactly clocking some serious speeds. It's sort of, if it's active, it's maybe cruising, pretty slowly, going to where it's going, needing to do its urchin business. But for the most part, the only way they really migrate far distances is through the larva. So the larval health is really important to them being able to disperse, and they can disperse really far sometimes, these little guys, if conditions are good.
Can we talk about our larva? What does it look like? Is it bigger than my pen? Is it bigger
No,
than the tip
it's
of my pen?
microscopic.
Microscopic?
You have to look at them under a scope.
It's just
to
a
see
few
them.
cells.
They have many cells, but they're pretty small. So
And they move. They're
they
already
move with their
smart enough to
cilia,
get
yeah.
around.
Yeah, they actually the urchin ones look like tiny spaceships. They have like a they're triangular with arms sticking out, so they're really cute.
Cute, charismatic.
Very charismatic.
Yes, well, this is great. They're watching, they're listening. So, how do they, do they get around? Do they get singly or in groups?
Mostly in groups. So usually, because they're at the mercy of the tides, the currents in the water, so once one cohort is released, it usually ends up staying together within the water. I mean, some do get separated and go other places, but a lot of the population genetics work that's done is you also need to look at the
survivors are going
oceanography.
to be in the cohort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, if they have mechanisms then, like ants, like swarm animals to stay together, like birds. They stay together.
They do tend to boom in large populations. So if things are good, you might see a lot of them, and if things are bad, you might see hardly any.
Yeah, because they die.
Yeah.
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 Unfortunately.
And now the thing about the algae, they eat the algae when they're stressed, but you like that. You like them when they eat the algae.
It's good when they graze algae,
Because
one thing
that's healthy for the coral reef.
it is. One thing that happened in the Caribbean, they have a Havana there. That's a long spined.
Havana?
Yeah, Havana, the Hawaiian word.
Havana.
Well, because the Hawaiian word for the long-spined urchins is vana, and there's actually a couple of other terms. A lot of the native Hawaiian words are very particular, very good biologists, very particular to the different kinds of urchins. So like long-spined ones are usually referred to as vana, and you don't want to touch them because they have very long spines.
But you can still eat them.
You can. And then there's the ones with the slightly shorter spines, the medium-sized spines, called ina. And then there's others that have even shorter spines, like the ones that I work on, because I stay away from the longer spines.
Why?
They're usually called Hawaii. But yeah, those guys they all have very similar reproductive patterns, but they're a little bit friendlier. Some of them, they have shorter spines that aren't as likely to poke you badly.
So I'm afraid to say that I don't remember eating urchins, but I know that a lot of people do eat urchins. And how do you prepare them and all that? You guys wouldn't eat urchins because you have an affinity for them.
Yeah.
It would make you feel
I
guilty.
think
Right.
a couple of the people, especially being here in Hawaii, a lot of the people it's uni, so they eat the eggs, so the gametes.
Cut them.
Yep,
and
just cut it
scrape 'em
off
out.
and scrape them out.
And put them on rice. I assure you. Ooh, sounds good.
I mean, not that I
don't
know personally, but I've heard
tried.
that it's salty, sweet. It's quite a delicacy.
You haven't had it.
I've heard tales.
This reminds me of a woman who she's South African, and she's the chief biologist, I guess, in Big Island, abalone.
Oh, nice.
So she gave me a tour, and I took movies of all the abalone in various stages of development. We got to the end. I said, "Okay, these are the ones you're shipping off to market. Why don't you take some out and eat them?" She says, "Oh, I don't eat abalone. They're my friends." How do you feel about urchins?
I think that they are, if properly managed, a very, very good source of nutrients. They're actually, the Caribbean side, they've got kind of a sister species to the Trinustis scrotilla, the collector urchin that we have here. They've got a sister species in the Caribbean, and it's the first, in Barbados in the 18th century, they had the first urchin management program to try to keep that little population going. It didn't work out so well, but people eat these guys all over the Caribbean and the Indo-Pacific.
Is it fair to say that urchins are everywhere, or are they just in the warmer climates?
So we have the urchins here in the warmer climates, but there are urchins in Antarctica, there are urchins on the Arctic, there are urchins all over the world.
Are they the same urchins?
Now, there's a very, very large number of them. Depending on who you ask, there's about between 700 and 900 different species of urchins.
So the
all over
urchins
the world.
that do well in the Arctic Ocean are not going to do well here.
Not
and vice
necessarily,
versa.
because there's a big temperature difference, and
Yeah.
they've evolved very specific mechanisms to handle that.
Yes, but you could make a kind of GMO urchin, couldn't you? That would do well in some other climate, sort of paste the characteristics.
Well, possibly. But the one big thing...
I don't want to give you any ideas.
Oh, of course not. No. But my lab at UH Manoa, the Floyd Reed lab, we work a lot with sort of conservation-minded genetics. So for the urchins right here, the big conservation interest is the fact that they're very good at keeping coral reefs clear of invasive algae. And like I was going to mention earlier, the long-spined urchins in the Caribbean, there was a big population collapse that happened about a decade ago. And after a lot of the urchins disappeared, the coral reefs started to suffer because there was algae that started growing over the corals and suffocating them. The corals were unable to get as much sunlight as they did because the algae didn't have its natural grazer anymore. And these urchins can be very efficient. There's not a lot of things to an urchin life aside from eating algae and producing more little urchins, and they're really good at both of those things. So when they were missing, the coral reef suffered.
That's interesting. So what are their natural enemies? What bothers them? Do they have natural enemies?
Yeah, they do.
Aside from poisons that come down from
It's dangerous being that
plantation
tasty.
ditches, you know?
Yeah.
What? Who eats them?
Well,
Aside from people.
Oh, yeah,
Aside-
humans eat them. A lot of fish eat them.
So triggerfish and things like parrotfish, can you mention?
They eat the whole
Yeah,
thing, or
pufferfish
they have a
can
way
crush
of
them.
poking through those spines.
Yeah, so some of these things are so good, like crabs and lobsters, they're hardy. They can break through some things and get those tasty gonads.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, urchins, like Aki was saying, they don't move very fast. So they're an easy target for a lot of other inverts like crabs and lobsters. And for fish, can just kind of pluck
So
them
the
off.
defense is the spines.
That's right.
Without the spines there.
So we can't really blame them for being a little prickly. They've been
No.
hurt by a lot of things, so they are a little defensive.
Okay. So now the what do you call it? The genome that you're working on.
Yeah.
What kind of experiments? What's your theory that you're trying to prove?
So a lot of early work looking at some very specific parts of the genome suggests that there's not a lot of variation across the Pacific. So South Africa to California doesn't look like it's that different. And that to me sounds just incredible.
Which way have they gone? East to west or
Well,
west to east?
according to sort of earlier data, it seems like they've just always been mixing for a long, long time. Like after the Isthmus of Panama closed, you kind of didn't have any diversity that was happening between.
Isn't that interesting? So it'll be the same on both sides.
So that's one of the things that I'm kind of looking to challenge a little bit. So I want to look, I have some data coming in from the genomics facility over at Coconut Island. So the Hawaiian Institute of Marine Biology have their own genomics facility. So I'm waiting on some data to come in there, representative genome, so a large number of genes from urchins collected here on Oahu. And I want to start comparing it to these urchins that are across the Indo-Pacific to see if there's any portion of their genome that might be changing significantly faster and might be able to tell us something about the way that you had population isolation across the Pacific. Because there might be a significant amount of isolation that we don't yet know of. And since these urchins are so important to a lot of the coral reefs, and they're so important to a lot of people who like to eat them, we want to know if there are populations that are not connected. Because if you have an explosion and a collapse, you might not be able to get any more down there.
So they're isolated. And they're in their own little gene pool. That's like a tidal pool, but different.
Right. And their only way to disperse is if their larvae can make the trip to another very good area.
Yeah, this is really, really, really interesting because you can.
Glad you think so.
You know, I do. I mean, it's like you do a swab now, send it in, and they'll give you a map of where your DNA has been, where it started the first time they can figure it out, and where it came, what country. I mean, it's sometimes frightening.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with really anybody, any animal that you can get DNA from.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, this is really interesting. So we don't have any more time for more stuff, but let me just ask you, do you think there'll come a time when urchins will be a significant source of protein? And will we have a kind of aquaculture of urchins if we don't already? Is that in the future?
I think so, yes.
Yeah.
I think they're a great natural resource, and if we can figure a more sustainable and consistent way of managing a population like this, they are a wonderful source of good nutrients, and they are a very critical part of a healthy coral reef ecosystem.
Yeah.
The Department of Land and Natural Resources has actually been overseeing a great project where the Nui Fisheries Research Center, managed by David Cohen, has been breeding these guys and bringing them out to the reefs to keep the algae that we're trying to clear off from growing back.
But
And
you
they're
could
very
do this
good at doing
commercially.
that.
I mean, I don't know if it has been done.
Yeah.
You could do it commercially, and you could grind it up and find protein there and feed the world.
If there's more interest, there's always going to be a very good way to do that. And right now we have a very good system of growing them in aquaculture. And so far that may lead to,
Okay, well, you know,
Food growth.
someday somebody's going to actually do this. They're going to have a big urchin farm, probably right here in Hawaii, and they're going to call on you, and you're going to be wealthier than your dreams
Oh, that'd be
than you ever
excellent.
dreamed. So hold on, keep
Yeah.
moving, keep going. Okay, that's Caitlyn Genovese and Aki Laruson.
Laruson.
Oh, okay, good enough.
That's all right.
And they have something in common, but they don't both work at the same biology faculty facility in Manoa. They're both graduate students looking for PhDs about urchins. And we've been calling this show Understanding Urchins. And I feel like we understand urchins a lot better now, don't you? Don't you feel that way? Thank you so much, Caitlyn and Aki.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Aloha.
Aloha.
We'll do it again.
Yeah, for sure.
Follow your action.